The centerpiece of the table was a floral arrangement I had ordered, paid for, and driven 40 minutes to pick up myself because the florist on 5th didn't deliver to my mother's neighborhood. White peonies, eucalyptus, a few sprigs of something my future sister-in-law had pinned to a mood board 3 weeks ago and texted me without context. Just the image and a single thumbs up. I arranged it myself that morning, trimmed the stems over my mother's kitchen sink, and placed it exactly where my brother's fiancé had pointed when she walked in and said, without looking at me, "There." The rehearsal dinner was everything they wanted. The tablecloths were the right shade of ivory. The caterer arrived on time because I had confirmed twice. The playlist was soft and warm and built from a Spotify link my brother had shared in our family chat, with no explanation and zero context, just the expectation that someone would figure it out. I figured it out. I always figured it out. My name is Nadia. And from wherever you're listening to this, stay with me, because the night my family forgot to see me was the same night I finally started seeing myself. I had been the quiet engine of this family for almost 7 years. Not the loudest, not the one anyone called to celebrate, just the one they called when something needed to actually get done. When my brother dropped out of his first college and decided to transfer, I helped him apply, proofread his essays, and quietly covered the application fees my mother said she'd handle and didn't. When my mother's car broke down the month she was between jobs, I leased her mine for 2 years and took the bus to work without a single complaint. When my grandmother needed an aide during her last summer and insurance wouldn't cover the full cost, I set up a recurring transfer from my checking account every first of the month and told no one. I didn't give because I wanted applause. I gave because they were my family, and I thought that was what love looked like. Invisible, consistent, unconditional. My brother, on the other hand, had always been the story of the family, the one everyone watched. He was charming and scattered in equal measure, the kind of person who could walk into a room 10 minutes late and somehow make everyone glad he finally arrived. Failed classes became reinventions. Broken plans became character development. Every stumble was reframed as a journey, and every achievement was celebrated like a miracle, because for him, it kind of was. When he got the job at the marketing firm, my mother cried at the dinner table. When he proposed to his girlfriend, she cried again. When he got approved for the apartment downtown, my mother called me before she called him just to tell me. I was happy for him. I genuinely was. What I didn't know was that my happiness had been budgeted into a category that didn't include acknowledgement. The rehearsal dinner was 30 people in the back room of an Italian restaurant I had made the reservation for. I had also handled the seating chart, confirmed dietary restrictions, and ordered a custom dessert for my future sister-in-law's mother, who mentioned in passing once that she didn't eat gluten. I caught that detail. I held on to it. I made it happen. That was what I did. At some point during the evening, my brother stood up to give a toast. I watched him straighten his jacket, tap his glass lightly, and smile the way he always did when he knew everyone was watching. He thanked his fiancée. He thanked her parents. He thanked his college roommate who had driven 6 hours to be there. He thanked my mother for always believing in him, which made her dab her eyes with a cloth napkin I had also picked up because the restaurant's napkins were paper and my future sister-in-law wanted cloth. He thanked the restaurant staff. He thanked the weather for cooperating. He did not thank me. There was a pause after the toast, the kind where people are waiting to see if there's more. My mother, sitting 2 seats away from me, leaned over to my aunt and whispered something. My aunt laughed softly. Then, maybe noticing the silence stretching a little too long, my brother looked in my general direction and said, casually, the way you'd mention the weather, and obviously Nadia handled a bunch of logistics. You know how she is. She can't help herself. A few people chuckled. My future sister-in-law smiled at her phone. My mother nodded like this was a complete and satisfying sentence. Like you know how she is was a compliment. I sat with it for exactly 4 seconds. Then I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, picked up my bag, and said to no one in particular, "Congratulations. It's a beautiful night." I walked to the front of the restaurant, paid the bill that I was already going to pay, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. I didn't cry in the rideshare home. I didn't cry when I unlocked my apartment door and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I didn't cry the next morning when I woke up to a text from my mother that said, "You left early? Everything okay?" 3 words asking after me. Not one word about what was said. Not one question about how I felt. Just a status check, making sure the logistics coordinator was still operational. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my phone and started pulling threads. First, the automatic rent contribution I had been quietly making to my brother's apartment fund, the one my mother had set up with my help 8 months ago when he was between paychecks and his fiancée was covering more than her share. She had asked me to just help bridge the gap for a couple months. 8 months later, it was still running. I canceled the recurring transfer. Second, the family streaming plan I managed across 4 accounts. Gone. Third, the shared grocery delivery subscription my mother used every week, billed to my card. The one I had added just temporarily when she first set it up 2 years ago and never revisited. Canceled. Then the toll pass account I had linked for my brother when he first got the downtown job, because his commute went through 2 toll bridges and he'd asked me to just spot him until he got his first check. That was 14 months ago. Removed. I wasn't angry. Or maybe I was, somewhere beneath the clarity. But what I felt most was tired. Tired of being the footnote in a story I had quietly helped write. Tired of "you know how she is" being the full sentence. Tired of my presence being defined entirely by what I could arrange, pay for, and carry without complaint. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt new. I made coffee at my own pace, sat by the window in the mornings, and let myself exist in the strange new lightness of not being needed. Then, 5 days later, the messages started. First from my brother, "Hey, the toll app said my account was suspended. Can you check your card?" I didn't respond. Then from my mother, "The grocery order didn't go through. Did something happen with the card?" I didn't respond to that either. Then from my future sister-in-law, who had never texted me directly about anything other than logistics. "Hi, the Netflix account logged me out, and it's saying the plan changed?" I read it, put my phone face down on the counter. Made myself breakfast. They weren't asking how I was. They were asking where their services went. You know what happens when you've been the infrastructure and you just quietly go offline? At first, it looks like a technical error, a glitch, a misunderstanding that someone will fix. Then the second thing stops working. Then the third. And the silence where the solution used to be starts to sound less like a mistake and more like a message. I didn't write a long explanation. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone to announce that I was done. That's not how I operated. I had never needed fanfare to show up for people. I wasn't going to need it to leave. My cousin Renee was the one who reached out differently. She called, not texted. And when I picked up, she just said, "I saw you leave that night. I should have followed you out." Renee was the only one in my family who had ever said thank you without needing something afterward. We talked for an hour. She told me the rehearsal dinner had gone sideways after I left. Not dramatically, just in that hollow way things go when the person holding it all together stops holding. The dessert for my future sister-in-law's mother had been left on the counter and not brought out. No one knew the table, for the grandparents had a separate dietary note. The playlist had ended, and no one thought to restart it. Small things, maybe. But Renee said the room had a different texture once I was gone. Like the warm lighting had shifted slightly, and no one could find the switch. She didn't say this to make me feel guilty. She said it because she wanted me to understand what I had actually been to them. Not a person at that dinner. A system. A background service running so smoothly that nobody thought to check whether it wanted to keep running. I told her I was okay. I told her I was actually, genuinely, okay. She believed me, because she knew me well enough to hear the difference. Around that time, my mother tried calling 3 days in a row. I let it go to voicemail each time. On the third day, she left a message. Her voice was measured, careful, the tone she used when she was trying to stay calm because she wasn't. She said she didn't understand what was going on. She said the family was confused. She said my brother was stressed with the wedding coming up. She said, and this was the part that stayed with me long after I deleted the voicemail. We never asked you to do all of that, Nadia. You offered. You can't blame us for accepting. I sat with that for a long time. She was technically right. I had offered. Every single time, I had offered. But here is what she left out. I had offered because every time I didn't, something went undone. And someone looked at me like I was the reason it fell apart. I had offered because can you handle this? Was the question, and no had never once felt like an available answer. I had offered because in my family, love had always been conjugated as a verb that only pointed one direction. And I had spent years confused about why the pointing never turned back toward me. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went to work. I had a presentation I'd been preparing for 3 weeks for a client my company had been trying to land for over a year. I walked into that room, set up my slides, and delivered 90 minutes that I had quietly rehearsed alone in my apartment at 11 at night after everyone else's logistics were handled. The client signed the following Tuesday. My manager called me into her office and told me she was recommending me for a senior position that would have been posted internally in another month. She said she'd been watching me for a while and that she wanted me to stop doing work that went uncredited. I almost laughed. She had no idea how much practice I had. I accepted. My brother found out about the promotion before I told anyone in my family, which tells you something about how information travels in that house. He sent me a text. Just one line. Heard you got promoted. Good for you. You always landed on your feet. I stared at that message for a long time. Landed on my feet. Like my work was gravity. Like the years I spent building something were just the natural outcome of falling. Like effort and sacrifice and showing up at 11 at night to prepare while others slept. Like none of that was the story. Just the landing. I didn't respond. My future sister-in-law reached out a week before the wedding with a very practical email, the kind designed to look casual but built around a need. She wanted to confirm whether I was still handling the day of coordination checklist she had sent me in September. The one with 43 items? The one I had been quietly working through for 2 months. She wanted to know if the florist confirmation had been sent and whether I had the catering timeline in my phone. I wrote back one sentence. I won't be coordinating the wedding. I hope the day is everything you want it to be. I heard through Renee that this caused a significant amount of panic. Not the sentimental kind. Not the kind where someone wonders if I'm okay or what they might have done to hurt me. The logistical kind. The 43 items kind. I went to the wedding. I sat in the 3rd row, wore a dress I bought for myself because I wanted to, and watched my brother get married. He looked happy. Genuinely. Warmly happy. And I found, sitting there watching him, that I felt something softer than I expected. Not resentment. Not satisfaction. Just a quiet sadness for the version of us that might have been the one where I was the sister he actually saw, not the sister who handled things. I held that feeling carefully, didn't push it away, and then let it go. At the reception, I sat with Renee and 2 of her friends, drank good wine, and laughed more than I had in months. When the toasts came, no one mentioned my name. I noted it the way you note weather, observed it, filed it, let it pass. I left before the cake cutting. Gave Renee a long hug at the door. She squeezed my hand and said, "You did good tonight." She meant more than the staying. She meant the choosing. The version of me from 2 years ago would have spent the drive home cataloging everything I could have done differently, how I could have said something, explained myself better, found a way to make them understand without making anyone uncomfortable. I would have planned the apology I didn't owe anyone and rehearsed the speech that would make everything okay again. Instead, I drove home with the windows down, let the cold air come in, stopped for gas station, coffee, even though it was late, sat in the parking lot for a few minutes listening to a song I liked. Nothing happened. I was just there, in my car, in the quiet, with no one waiting for me to fix anything. There is a particular kind of freedom that people who have never been depended on can't fully understand. It's not the loud kind. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in slowly, the way warmth comes back to cold hands. Not in a rush, but in degrees. One small, returning sensation at a time. I started noticing it in the mornings. I woke up and my first thought wasn't someone else's problem. I noticed it in my bank account, which had more room to breathe than it had in 3 years. I noticed it in my body, in the absence of a particular tightness I had come to think was just how shoulders felt. I started saying yes to things I'd been rescheduling for months. I enrolled in a photography class on Sunday mornings that I had been saving a link to for over a year. I went to a comedy show with a coworker who had been asking me to come for months and who laughed so hard at one point that she had to grab my arm. And I laughed too, from somewhere real. I started cooking dinners I actually wanted to eat instead of batch prepping things that traveled well and required no time I didn't have. I built a life that looked exactly like what I wanted it to look like. Quiet evenings, good light, people who called to ask how I was and stayed on the line long enough to actually hear the answer. One Sunday morning, Renee came over for breakfast. She brought pastries from the bakery near her apartment, and we sat at my kitchen table while the sun came in sideways through the window. She told me that my mother had started asking her questions, not about whether I was okay, about whether I was doing this to punish everyone. I let that sentence settle in the air between us. Punishing everyone, not. Wondering if she hurt me, not. Trying to understand what happened. The framework was punishment. The assumption was that my withdrawal was a performance staged for their benefit, that everything, even my silence, was still about them. That's when I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. My family had never been able to conceive of me as someone with an interior life that wasn't defined by their needs. I wasn't a person to them, not fully. I was a response mechanism, a function. And when the function stopped, they didn't ask what the function felt. They asked why the function had stopped working. I thanked Renee for telling me. Then I turned the conversation to her, to the things happening in her life, to the trip she was planning and the person she had been quietly falling for. We sat there for 2 hours and I did not think about my mother once. A few weeks later, my brother called, not texted, called. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me. He sounded different, less assured. He said he wanted to talk, that things had been strange, that he felt like something had shifted without him understanding when or why. I listened. I let him finish. And then I said, carefully and clearly, "At your rehearsal dinner, you said I can't help myself. You said it in front of 30 people as a way of thanking me for months of work, and everyone laughed, including you." The silence that followed was long. He said he hadn't thought of it that way. I told him I believed him. "That was the problem," I said. "You didn't think about it at all. That's been the whole problem, for a long time." He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need him to. I wasn't calling for a resolution or a tearful reconciliation. I was just finally saying the true thing out loud to the person who needed to hear it. What he did with it was his work to do, not mine. I wished him well with the new apartment. Asked him to take care. Hung up. That night, I wrote in my journal 4 lines that I had been turning over in my mind for weeks, maybe longer. I carried the weight without a word. I laid it down the same way. You called it abandonment. I called it, finally, arriving. I framed it. It hangs above the small desk where I pay my own bills now, no one else's. Where I plan trips I actually want to take. Where I make decisions that are only mine to make. I don't know what my family tells people about what happened. Maybe that I changed. Maybe that I became distant, cold, difficult. Maybe that I threw away a family over one comment at a dinner. They are welcome to that version of the story. Here is mine. I was 31 years old, and I had been showing up for people who had never once asked themselves what it cost me. I had been so committed to being useful that I had forgotten to be visible. I had measured my worth in logistics and transfers and acts of quiet maintenance. And I had done it so consistently for so long that when I stopped, they didn't mourn the person, they mourned the service. That told me everything. I don't carry bitterness about any of it. I've sat with it long enough to know the difference between bitterness and clarity. And what I have is clarity. Sharp and clean and remarkably light. I give still, generously, even, but now I give to people who see me on an ordinary Tuesday, who text to ask if I've eaten, who show up when nothing is wrong and stay when something is. I give from a place that doesn't hurt, from the kind of fullness you can only find after you've stopped pouring yourself out for people who never once thought to fill you back up. There is no applause at the end of this story, no dramatic reconciliation, no moment where my family gathers and admits what they put me through, and I forgive them with tears and relief and the soft swell of strings in the background. Life is not that tidy, and I have stopped needing it to be. What there is this. A Sunday morning with good light through my window. Coffee I made slowly. A photography class I look forward to every week. Renee's laugh on the other end of the phone. A promotion I earned. A desk where I sit and write and do not owe anyone anything. What there is a woman who learned the hardest way that you cannot purchase belonging with labor. That love is not a service contract, that the people who only see you when you are useful have, in fact, never seen you at all. And what there is, quietly, every single morning, is peace. Not the peace of having fixed everything, not the peace of being forgiven or understood or properly thanked, just peace. The kind that belongs entirely to you, the kind no one can hand you at a rehearsal dinner with 30 people watching, the kind you find when you stop waiting for permission to take up space. I am not needed by my family anymore, and I have never, in my entire life, felt more like myself.